You've found nightfall murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. When first I glimpsed it, fatigue was the easy scapegoat. Night shifts guarding raw earth 50 miles beyond nowhere breed such specters in the mind's periphery. Yet what followed refuses the solace of delusion. Not the footprints etched in impossible mud, nor the tools spirited away. None of it submits to reason. For 15 years, my nights belonged to the skeletal frameworks of cities to be, warding off copper thieves and souls seeking refuge. This assignment, though, resonated differently from its inception. The Serpent River Dam project nested deep within unforgiving mountain folds. No whisper of cell signal reached here. Only an emergency radio tethered me to the world beyond. The wage offered was triple standard, a siren song that should have warned me. My predecessor, I learned from Barlow, the site supervisor, had vanished from the roster after a mere fortnight, citing personal troubles. Barlow's eyes slid away. Coin is coin, I didn't pry. The initial week unfolded with predictable monotony. Arrive at dusk, exchange curt nods with the departing day shift, commence the rounds. The site sprawled, a nascent concrete behemoth bisecting the valley, flanked by temporary structures, equipment graveyards, and material depots scattered across 20 raw acres. Portable light towers punched holes of brutal white into the gloom, carving islands of visibility amid oceans of shadow. Beyond lay only wilderness and night. My ritual was fixed. Patrol the perimeter every 2 hours, inspect the machinery yard, scan the monitors in the main trailer, ensure the great metal beasts slept soundly. Elementary duties. The 8th night fractured the routine. My 2 a.m. circuit led me near the eastern equipment yard when I registered it. A form, stark and motionless, poised just at the light's ragged edge near Tower 3. Tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, too distant for clarity. Just an obelisk of darkness against deeper darkness. My flashlight beam leaped forth. "Hey, sight's restricted." No response, not a twitch. I advanced, boots grinding gravel. "Security! Armed! You need to clear out!" A necessary fiction. Company policy forbade firearms. 20 yards separated us. Still, that profound stillness. A prickle traced my nape. Its posture felt alien, rigid, like weathered stone. "Final warning! Calling this in!" 15 yards. The tower's glare began to sculpt its form. Dark work clothes, heavy boots, the unmistakable dome of a hard hat. 10 yards. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Its proportions seemed subtly wrong. Arms hanging too long, the neck canted unnaturally. 5 yards. I lifted the flashlight beam, aiming for the face. A void greeted the light. I stood, paralyzed. Where the figure had been an instant before, the beam now sliced through vacant air, illuminating nothing but the gravel and the night swallowing the light's reach. I spun, sweeping the flashlight's cone across the oppressive dark. Silence. No retreating footsteps, no rustle in the unseen periphery. Only the ceaseless thrum of the generators, the site's mechanical heartbeat. My hand, unsteady, keyed the radio. "Base, Elias here. Anyone else logged for site access tonight? Static hissed, then the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Negative, Elias. You're solo out there. Everything copacetic. I hesitated, the image searing my mind. Yeah, thought I saw movement. Must be shadows. The remainder of my rounds was a study in hypervigilance, every shadow scrutinized twice. Nothing. By the time dawn bled over the eastern peaks, I'd nearly convinced myself. A trick of light, a mind frayed by isolation. Then, entering the main office to sign out, I saw them. The footprints. Large impressions, caked in wet mud, leading directly from the eastern yard to the office threshold. Impossible mud. The ground hadn't seen rain in over a week. I tracked them inside. They marched straight to the tool storage room. The door remained locked, precisely as I'd secured it hours earlier. But unlocking it, stepping inside, I felt a cold certainty. The meticulous order mandated by company protocol was violated. Gaps scarred the pegboard walls where tools should have hung. A chainsaw, a pair of hefty demolition hammers, a concrete saw. Serious weight, far too much for a single intruder to shift silently. I rewound the security footage. 8 cameras, 8 vacant perspectives, showing nothing but the empty, illuminated site throughout the night. No figures, no trespassers, just the inexplicable footprints and the missing inventory. I reported the theft to Barlow upon his arrival. He absorbed the news without a flicker of surprise. Happened last month, he stated, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. Month before, too. Always aligns with the new moon. Same specific tools vanish. They turn up again after a few days, coated in mud and something else. Smells like decay. And you neglected to mention this when I signed on? A shrug. The gesture spoke volumes. Would it have changed your mind? The urge to walk away then and there was potent. I should have. But the tripled rate held its grip, and a deeper, more unsettling curiosity had taken root. I needed to fathom what I'd witnessed. The subsequent nights were steeped in an unnerving quiet. The typical nocturnal chorus, crickets, the hoot of owls, fell silent. Only the wind whispering through the valley and the generator drone remained. Other anomalies surfaced. The light towers, despite their independent circuits, would sometimes flicker in unsettling unison. Tools migrated subtly from their designated spots, even within the locked storage room I meticulously maintained. Then came the scratching. I first detected it in the main office, reviewing the silent tapes. A slow, deliberate scraping from within the walls, as if something sharp, something clawed, sought entry. Placing a hand against the flimsy paneling, I felt the faint vibration. But the instant my flashlight beam sought the source, silence resumed. This auditory phantom pursued me nightly, migrating across the site, inside the chemical toilets, beneath the equipment trailers, behind the monolithic steel storage containers, always ceasing just before discovery. I began documenting everything photographically at shift start. Tool arrangement, equipment placement, the pattern of tire tracks. Comparing these images at shift end revealed minute alterations. A wrench displaced by inches, a hard hat reversed on its hook, surveyor stakes subtly pounded deeper into the earth. The day crew remained oblivious. Whatever transpired here belonged solely to the night. A week after the faceless encounter, the first message appeared, gouged into the office door's paint with crude, jagged strokes. "Get out." Barlow painted over it before the day shift arrived, offering no comment, asking no questions, just another layer of willful ignorance. 2 nights later, another missive materialized, carved into the wooden handle of a shovel. "We were here first." Driven, I delved into the site's lineage. The dam project itself was fraught, delayed by years of environmental disputes. Before that, pristine wilderness reigned, but digging deeper unearthed faint records of an older enterprise, a mining operation from the 1880s. The accounts were fragmented, mentioning a catastrophe, a cave-in, 27 miners entombed, their remains never retrieved. The mine entrance dynamited shut, its precise coordinates lost to time. Yet overlaying antique maps with the dam's blueprints sent a glacial chill through me. The Eastern Equipment Yard, the very spot where the figure first manifested, sat directly atop the estimated location of that buried mine shaft. I presented my findings to Barlow. He refused engagement, deflecting any historical concerns toward corporate bureaucracy. His hands, I noted, trembled slightly as he spoke. That night, the temperature plummeted 30 degrees within minutes. The generators began to cough and sputter. One by one, the light towers died, plunging vast swathes of the site into absolute blackness. I was mid-round when the darkness fell. The backup batteries designed for such failures remained inert. My own flashlight beam felt feeble, swallowed by the oppressive gloom. Then I heard it, footsteps crunching gravel directly behind me. Heavy boots, slow, deliberate. I whirled around, nothing. Yet the sound persisted, circling me, drawing inexorably closer. My weak light snagged movement, figures coalescing from the shadows. 6, 7, perhaps 8 of them, clad in archaic mining gear, all unnaturally tall, their limbs elongated. Hard hats obscured their faces within deep shadow. They formed a silent ring around me, hovering just beyond the effective reach of my dying light. Motionless, breathless, heads tilted at angles that defied anatomy. My radio crackled, erupting in a cacophony of static. Through the noise, voices emerged, multiple voices, speaking in chilling unison. "This ground is ours. These tools belong to us. The deep dark below is our claim." The static surged, overwhelming the voices, overwhelming everything. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and surrendered to the dark. Absolute blackness. Then movement, the collective crunch of many boots on gravel, closing in. I ran, blindly, stumbling over unseen obstacles, tripping on rebar and discarded materials. Behind me, the footsteps matched my pace. Never closer, never farther. A steady, relentless pursuit. I reached the main office, slammed the door, threw the lock, fumbled for the backup flashlight on the desk. Its beam flared, illuminating the windows. They stood outside each one, still silent, still unmoving. Their hard hats were now angled back, revealing faces that were nothing but black, depthless cavities punctuated by rows of teeth. The scratching resumed, not from the walls this time, but from beneath the floorboards. Louder now, frantic. The entire trailer began to vibrate. Cracks spiderwebbed across the cheap flooring. Mud, dark, viscous, reeking of rot and corroded metal, began to ooze up through the widening gaps. I kicked out a window on the side furthest from the watching figures and scrambled out, running again. Ran until my truck was a dim shape in the distance. Didn't stop driving until the gas station lights of a distant town offered a fragile sanctuary. From a payphone, I called Barlow, told him I was finished. "They all quit eventually," he sighed, his voice thick with exhaustion. "We'll mail the final check." 3 months have passed. A week after I left, the missing tools reappeared in the parking lot of the nearest sheriff's department, coated in that same foul mud, rust, and traces of something unidentifiable. The Serpent River Dam project grinds on. They hire new night guards. One replaces the next. The turnover is astronomical, yet desperation always provides a fresh candidate. Sometimes the thought of returning surfaces, not for the money, but for the gnawing need to understand what they are, what they desire, why I was permitted to leave when those miners centuries ago were not. Then the memory returns, those abyssal faces, the teeth, and the second message echoes. We were here first. Perhaps in some way incomprehensible to the living, they remain, still working their subterranean claim, still using their tools, still walking their endless rounds in the deep night. Some knowledge, I suspect, is best left buried. Last week, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single sheet. Words scratched onto it in that familiar jagged script. "We miss our night watchman. Return to the deep. Your place is kept." I burned it, moved apartments, but sometimes, late at night, I hear a faint scratching within my own walls, and occasionally, glancing out my window, I see fresh boot prints in mud that has no reason to be there. They are waiting, and a cold dread tells me that, eventually, I will answer their call. Because the deep dark, once it finds you, burrows under your skin. It never truly lets go. For now, I cling to the daylight hours, to the city's concrete embrace, to the sun's glare. I try not to dwell on what patrols the Serpent River site after dusk, or why the dam's completion recedes ever further into the future, or how many more will take the night shift before they finally abandon the project, if they ever do. Some places refuse violation, some Earth rejects disturbance, and some shifts were never meant for the living. That's the story I tell myself. It helps me sleep, on most nights. The phantom warmth of garlic and blistered tomato ghosted from the insulated bag on my passenger seat, an aroma usually capable of coaxing saliva to my tongue. Tonight, though, threading the ink-dark alien avenues of this affluent enclave, a knot tightened low in my belly, a dread without source or name. Little could I fathom that this mundane run, another square box exchanged for crumpled bills, was the threshold to a labyrinth of fear destined to echo through my years. Leo, that's me. For half a year, I've piloted this old Datsun for Vittorio's Pizzeria, chasing tuition fees under suburban moons. Most shifts blur into a monotony of asphalt ribbons and porch lights. Not this one. This one felt curdled from the moment I swung onto the street. The target address loomed apart, withdrawn from its manicured brethren, cloaked in an unnatural depth of shadow. Its porch lamp, a blind eye, offered no welcome, peculiar for an awaited delivery. As my feet crunched on the unseen gravel path, a primitive prickle crawled the nape of my neck. Wrongness saturated the air. I pressed the bell. A muffled, swallowed chime stirred within the house's depths. Silence answered. My knock, louder this time. "Hello? Pizza delivery for you." Poised on the verge of retreat, of returning to the Dotsons' battered sanctuary, the door groaned inward on reluctant hinges. A figure materialized, face bisected by shadow. Tall, gaunt, a ragged map of beard obscuring his jawline. His eyes possessed a disturbing intensity, seeming to pierce straight through my practiced delivery guy smile. "Vittorio's order," I managed, the cheer brittle in my throat. "Comes to 1850. He offered a curt nod, retreating slightly, a silent invitation into the maw of the house. Company directive screamed against crossing the threshold, yet an unnerving pressure in his stillness paralyzed my refusal. The instant I stepped onto the cool interior floor, the heavy door slammed shut behind me with a resonant boom that vibrated in my bones. Dimness reigned, the space sparsely populated with indistinct furniture shapes. He guided me toward what might have been a living room, a cavern of low light and silence. "Stay put," he commanded, his voice a low, rough burr. He vanished through an adjacent doorway, leaving me anchored to the spot, the pizza bag suddenly a leaden weight in my grasp. Time stretched, measured only by the insistent, nearby tick-tock of an unseen clock. The silence wasn't empty, it pressed, thick and suffocating. Anxiety began its insidious crawl. This deviated wildly from the norm. Depositing the pizza onto a dust-filmed side table, I ventured a call. "Sir, your food's here, getting cold." Only the clock replied. Hesitantly, I took a step towards the doorway he'd used. Footsteps scraped behind me. Spinning, I found him returned, but not alone. Clutched in his fist, stark against the gloom, was the unmistakable silhouette of a handgun, its muzzle aimed squarely at my chest. My heart vaulted, slamming against my ribs. "Whoa! Hey!" I stammered, hands instinctively rising. "Easy, man. No trouble here." "Sit," he ordered, the word cold, sharp as shattered glass. I sank onto the edge of a sagging couch, thoughts scrambling like frantic static. What vortex had I stumbled into? The gun remained unwavering, his gaze pinning me. "Any idea why you're really here?" he inquired, menace lacing the question. A shake of my head, a struggle to keep my voice from fracturing. No clue, just delivering your pizza." A sneer twisted his shadowed features. "Your boss, Silas, he obliterated my life, and you're going to be my instrument of balance." Silas, my boss, the quiet owner of Vittorio's? What possible catastrophe could link him to this spectral figure? The man began to pace, a caged predator, the gun a constant punctuation mark to his movements. He spat words like venom, accusations of betrayal, financial ruin engineered by Silas, the splintering of his family. Fury and a profound bitterness radiated from him, palpable as heat. Calmness was a distant shore I strained towards, while fear's icy talons raked my insides. Escape. I needed an escape route, but his volatility, amplified by the weapon, made any move a gamble. My eyes darted, cataloging the dim room, searching for leverage, an opportunity. He caught the flicker. "Don't entertain foolish notions," he warned, the gun gesturing emphatically. "You leave when my account with Silas is settled, not before." Drawing a ragged breath, I fought for clarity. Listen, I'm just the delivery guy. I know nothing about whatever went down between you and Silas. Maybe there's another way to sort this? He shook his head, knuckles whitening on the gun's grip. No, you're collateral. A message. Silas. He will comprehend the cost. His pacing resumed, accompanied by fragmented muttering. The window of opportunity, if it existed, was closing. Then I saw it, a substantial table lamp, perched precariously close on an end table, my only prayer. Waiting for his back to turn in his agitated circuit, I launched myself from the couch, snatching the lamp's heavy base, swinging it in a desperate arc. The impact against his skull was a sickening thud. He staggered, a grunt escaping him as the gun clattered to the floorboards. I didn't pause to assess, scrabbling for the fallen weapon, its cold metal shocking my palm. I bolted for the front door. My hands, slick with sweat and trembling violently, fumbled with the lock. Once, twice, before it finally yielded. I burst into the night air, sprinting toward the Datsun, wrenching the door open, throwing myself inside, slamming the lock down. The key shook wildly in my grasp, refusing the ignition. Finally, agonizingly, the engine coughed, then roared. A glance in the rearview mirror revealed the man stumbling onto the porch, one hand clamped to his head. I stomped the accelerator, tires spitting gravel as I tore away from that house of shadows. The drive back to Vittorio's was a high-speed blur, fueled by raw adrenaline and terror, my mind replaying the nightmare in fractured loops. I burst through the pizzeria door, startling Silas, who was tidying up for the night. "Leo! Christ, what happened? You look like you wrestled a ghost," he exclaimed, his brow furrowed in immediate concern. My legs gave way, and I collapsed onto a nearby chair. Between ragged gasps, the story spilled out. The house, the man, the gun, the terrifying accusations against Silas himself. His face progressively bleached of color as I spoke. "Oh dear God," Silas whispered, sinking heavily into the chair opposite me. "Caleb, I never thought, not this far." "You know him?" The question was incredulous, laced with a dawning anger. Silas nodded, his gaze distant, haunted. "Caleb, we were partners years back. Business. It ended badly, very badly. But this, holding someone hostage." A strange cocktail of relief and resentment churned within me. Relief that it wasn't random, that my ordeal had roots, however twisted. Resentment that Silas's unresolved past had nearly cost me my life. "We have to call the police," I stated, hand already reaching for my phone. He nodded again, seeming to age years in that moment. "You're right, Leo. Should have dealt with this long ago." The ensuing hours dissolved into a disorienting sequence of flashing lights, official questions, and statements repeated until my throat was raw. The police took the gun, bagged as evidence, promising pursuit of Caleb. As the adrenaline finally ebbed, the crushing weight of the night settled upon me. My hands refused to still. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. Silas insisted on driving me home, his apologies a constant, mournful refrain. "I'm so profoundly sorry, Leo. This mess, I never wanted anyone else dragged into it." I could only nod, too depleted for words. At my apartment building, Silas turned in his seat, his expression grave. Take time off, Leo, as much as you need. Paid, of course. And if you decide this isn't for you anymore, I'll understand completely. I considered it, the prospect of driving into the night again suddenly terrifying. Yet beneath the fear, a strange, unfamiliar ember glowed. Pride. I'd faced down a man armed and unhinged, and I was still breathing. I'd used my wits, my desperation. "I'll let you know," I said, the words feeling inadequate. That night, staring sightlessly at my bedroom ceiling, the reel played relentlessly. Caleb's burning eyes, the cold weight of the gun, the visceral crack of the lamp. It felt borrowed, like scenes from a grim film, not my own lived experience. But as days bled into a week, a subtle alchemy occurred within. The raw fear didn't vanish, but it receded, making space for a quiet, hard-won confidence. I had looked into the abyss and hadn't blinked. What else could possibly unnerve me now? A week later, I pushed open the door to Vittorio's. Silas looked up, surprise flickering across his weary features. "Leo, you certain about this?" I nodded, reaching for the next delivery docket, the familiar slip of paper feeling different in my hand. "Yeah, I'm good, but Silas, next time one of your vengeful ex-partners is on the loose, maybe a memo to the drivers, yeah?" A ghost of a laugh escaped him, relief washing over his face. "Deal." Walking out to the Datsun, pizza bag swinging from my fist, the night air felt charged. The streets remained dark, potentially holding unknown turns, but the dread was gone, replaced by a thrumming readiness. The steam, escaping the bag, still whispered of garlic and tomato, but now, instead of tightening my gut, it smelled of possibility, of a life suddenly sharper, etched with risk and resilience. I turned the key, the engine catching smoothly this time, and pulled out into the flow of headlights, prepared for whatever the darkness might offer. I wasn't just a pizza guy anymore. I was a survivor. The hour was late when Elias dragged himself home, the city's pavements having exacted their toll on his already weary frame. Each step up to his apartment door felt leaden. He eased the lock open, slipped inside the threshold, and clicked the door shut behind him, plunging the space into near silence. Only the ambient glow of a distant street lamp filtered through the flimsy living room curtains, painting faint, spectral shapes on the furniture. His keys landed with a soft clink on the entryway table as he shrugged off his jacket, shoulders protesting with stiffness. A longing for oblivion settled over him. The couch, perhaps, the flickering blue light of the television, a simple glass of water. He'd taken maybe 3 steps towards the shadowed sofa when the sound sliced through the quiet. An insistent, jangling cry. He froze. His pulse leaped, a frantic bird trapped in his ribs. It emanated from the side table, the old landline, a relic he never touched, swaddled in dust. He relied entirely on his mobile now. He was certain, utterly certain, the landline wasn't even connected. Hadn't he left the cord dangling uselessly behind the unit weeks ago after rearranging the room? He remembered the sight of it, limp and unplugged. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, Elias drifted closer, eyes straining in the dimness. The phone sat there, a black, obsolete shape. No cord snaked to the wall jack, yet the ringing was undeniable. Sharp, piercing, real enough to vibrate the tabletop beneath it. A constricting band tightened around his chest. With a hand that felt strangely distant, he lifted the receiver, its cool plastic pressing against his ear. Respiration met him, slow, uneven, distinctly male. Then, a voice, low and raspy as grinding stones, began to speak. The sound warped as if filtered through illness. It knew the clothes he wore today, item by item, color by color, detail by detail. The inventory unfolded. It recounted his visit to the coffee shop, pinpointed the exact table, the discarded newspaper, the stray coins left shimmering on the counter. It knew of his grocery run, listing the specific contents of his basket. It knew he'd brushed his knuckles against the iron railing outside the building that morning, that his fingers had tapped the apartment doorknob thrice, checking the lock. Elias stood rigid, the receiver clamped in a slick palm, his own breathing suspended. He listened, mute, as this disembodied rasp narrated the minutiae of his day. A prickling unease crawled up his arms, raising the fine hairs. His throat felt like sandpaper. His gaze dropped to the telephone's base. The cord remained disconnected, hanging free. A wordless question formed, but his mind was a sudden void, thoughts scattering like startled birds. His hands began to quiver. Then the voice murmured it knew his secrets, followed by a slow, guttural chuckle that made his stomach clench violently. Before Elias could force a sound, the line clicked dead. Utter silence flooded back in. He held the receiver away, listening to the profound emptiness, then slowly, mechanically, placed it back in its cradle. He remained motionless for what felt like a full minute, staring at the inert object, the rigidity in his neck and legs screaming. Flicking on a nearby lamp, he inspected the phone again. Unplugged. He traced the power cord, also disconnected from the wall socket. No current, no connection. The phone had no earthly reason to ring. He checked his mobile. 0 missed calls. Peering through the curtains revealed an empty street, devoid of cars or figures lurking near the entrance. A desperate need to regain composure propelled him into motion. He paced the small living room, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped drum. In the kitchen, he fumbled for a glass, filled it with cold tap water, and drank it down in quick gulps, leaning against the sink, focusing on the sound of his own ragged intake and exhale. The apartment felt unnervingly still, amplifying its emptiness. Fatigue, he tried to tell himself. Imagination running wild after a long day. But the shrill summons had been real. The vibration beneath his fingertips, undeniable. The voice, its chilling accuracy. No figment could conjure such specifics. He set the glass down with a trembling hand. Returning to the living room, he jabbed at the phone's keypad. Nothing. Dead plastic. Defeated, he sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sleep offered little respite that night, fractured by sudden awakenings, compulsive checks of his mobile's clock, his gaze repeatedly drawn to the silent telephone sentinel on the table. It did not ring again. Morning found him stiff, joints protesting, the residue of fear clinging like damp cloth. He dressed slowly, his eyes periodically flicking towards the phone. Still inert, still useless. The impulse to dispose of it was strong. He picked it up, turning it over. Dust coated the underside. There was no battery compartment. It was a simple, powerless thing without its connection. He carried it to his bedroom, tucked it deep within a drawer, and turned the key in the lock. Later, perhaps, he would discard it properly. The day unfolded under a pall of anxiety. Shower, clothes, commute. The motions felt automated. He tried to bury the memory of the voice, but it lingered at the periphery of his thoughts, a persistent hum beneath the surface of normalcy. Focusing on work was a struggle. The uncanny knowledge of his every trivial action echoed in his mind. Had he been watched? Followed? He found himself glancing over his shoulder on the street, scanning faces in the lunchtime crowd, scrutinizing reflections in shop windows. Nothing overtly suspicious presented itself. At his desk, the familiar tasks felt alien. A slight tremor persisted in his hands. "Bad night," he mumbled to a colleague, offering no further detail, unwilling to voice the bizarre truth and invite disbelief or concern. Lunch was a solitary affair, punctuated by constant, fruitless checks of his mobile. Leaving work, Elias walked home faster than usual, his senses hyper-alert, searching the urban landscape for unseen observers. Inside the building, up the stairs, he paused at his apartment door, listening intently. Silence. He entered, performing the ritual. Keys on the table, jacket off, collapsing onto the couch. He switched on the television, seeking distraction in its manufactured noise. Hours bled away. Then, around the same time as the previous night, the sound returned. Not from the living room, but from his bedroom. A knot tightened in his throat. He rose, drawn towards the source. The ringing emanated from the locked drawer. It seemed louder tonight, more frantic. He reached out, turned the key, pulled the drawer open. There it lay, the receiver rattling faintly with each jangling summons. Cord and power plug remained detached. Hesitantly, he lifted it, pressed, answer. The same gravelly timbre greeted him. It knew he'd tried to lock it away. It described the precise motion of him opening the drawer moments before. It knew he'd altered his route home from work. It recited the contents of his lunchtime sandwich, the exact minute he'd finished eating. It knew about his furtive backward glances on the street, and it laughed again, a shade louder this time, grating against his nerves. Sweat beaded on the back of his neck. "Who are you?" Elias managed, his voice a thin tremor. The question was ignored. It knew he was nervous. The voice rasped, knew he was sweating. It could see his hand shaking. He lifted his free hand. It was indeed trembling violently. "Tell me what you want," he pleaded. A heavy, deliberate breath filled the earpiece, followed by another sharp click. Silence resumed. He lowered the receiver, standing frozen, breath catching shallowly in his chest. A vice seemed to close around his ribs, a dull pressure building behind his forehead. Seizing the phone, he marched to the kitchen, rummaged beneath the sink for the small toolbox, and retrieved a hammer. He brought it down hard on the phone's plastic casing. A crack spiderwebbed across the surface. Again. He separated the receiver from the base and pulverized both, shattering them into jagged shards of plastic and metal wire. No hidden chips, no unexpected batteries, just the mundane guts of an old telephone, now destroyed. He swept the debris into a plastic grocery bag, knotted it securely, and shoved it under the sink, slamming the cabinet door shut. He stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. Sleep came only behind a locked bedroom door, the television left murmuring in the living room as a flimsy shield against the silence. It was a long, fitful wait for unconsciousness, his heart maintaining a frantic tempo. The next morning, his first act was to check the kitchen cabinet. The bag of phone fragments remained undisturbed. A sliver of relief, fragile but present. He tried to anchor himself in routine. Dressed, out the door, work. On the street, faces swam past, indifferent. At his desk, the effort to concentrate was immense. The police? What could he possibly report? A phantom call on a disconnected line? He'd destroyed the only evidence. They'd dismiss him as delusional or worse. He would wait. Perhaps somehow it was over. Evening descended uneventfully. He made pasta, eating it standing in the kitchen, deliberately avoiding the living room. He watched television, but his gaze kept straying to the empty spot on the side table, now just a dusty outline. Maybe smashing the phone had broken the connection, severed the link. The hours crawled. Weariness began to claim him. He started to doze on the couch. Then came a new sound. Not a ring, but a low, persistent buzz. He sat bolt upright, listening. It came from the hallway closet near the front door. Heart sinking, he opened it. Tucked away on a shelf lay his old cordless phone, forgotten for years. Its base station was unplugged, its handset battery surely long dead. Yet the charging light glowed faintly, and the handset itself vibrated with the dull hum. He picked it up. A wave of dread washed over him, but the compulsion to answer was absolute. He pressed the green talk button. Instantly, the rough voice filled his ear. It saw him destroy the other phone. It knew about his troubled sleep. It heard his ragged breathing the day before. A lump formed in Elias's throat. Words failed him. The voice continued, relentless. It would keep calling. It enjoyed watching him unravel. He could try to run, it chuckled, but he wouldn't get far. It knew his habits too intimately. It listed his actions after work, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, crossing the street to avoid a cluster of teenagers, entering the corner store only to leave empty-handed. Vertigo washed over him. He gripped the handset tighter. "Who are you?" he choked out again, ignored. A slow inhale, exhale. It would call again tomorrow. Elias ripped the battery from the cordless handset, gathered the base and handset, and stuffed them into the same plastic bag under the sink, knotting it even tighter. He carried the bag out of the apartment, down the echoing stairwell, and into the shadowed alley behind the building, dropping it into the communal dumpster with a thud. He scanned the darkness, empty, silent. No footsteps shadowed his retreat. Back inside, he bolted the door, checked every window lock. He unplugged the television, the internet router, even his mobile charger. Every light was extinguished save for a single dim bulb in the hallway, a meager sentinel against intrusion. He began to pace the confines of his apartment, a restless circuit of fear. His forehead was damp, his palms slick with cold sweat. When the appointed hour arrived the following night, Elias sat rigidly on the couch, waiting. No landline, no cordless phone. His mobile was switched off, heavy in his pocket. He waited in the charged silence. Then, the sound. From the bathroom. He pushed the door open. On a small shelf sat an old portable radio, occasionally used for morning news. It was off, unplugged, but a crackle of static emanated from its speaker. He snatched it up, shook it, twisted the knobs futilely. The static abruptly ceased, replaced by that familiar, terrifying respiration, now tinny and distorted through the small speaker. The voice. It knew he'd thrown the phones away. It didn't matter. It would find a way. Elias's arms felt like water. The radio nearly slipped from his grasp. He clutched it tighter. The voice advised him to stop discarding his devices. It could use anything. It knew he was wearing the same trousers as yesterday. It told him to look in the mirror. He turned, meeting his own reflection. A pale, haunted face stared back, underscored by dark circles. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in his ears. The voice promised it would always be there, every night, same time. He couldn't stop it. The grating laughter returned, then the radio fell silent. Elias carefully placed the radio back on the shelf and retreated, legs trembling beneath him. He stumbled into the hallway, pressing his back against the cool wall, sliding down until he sat huddled on the floor. His breathing came in rapid, shallow gasps he couldn't control. Fumbling in his pocket, he retrieved his mobile, powering it on. Call someone? The police? The sheer absurdity, the lack of any tangible proof, paralyzed him. How could he explain impossible electronics, a voice from nowhere? He just sat there, phone clutched in his hand, staring into the oppressive emptiness of his living room. A knot of ice tightened in his stomach. His skin felt cold, clammy. Sleep was impossible. He simply waited. Nothing more happened until the next evening, punctual as ever. This time, his television screen flared to life unbidden. Static snow filled the screen, and through the speakers, the calm, rough voice resumed its narration of his day. It knew where he'd eaten lunch. It knew he'd varied his route home yet again. It knew he'd tried pinning heavier blankets over the windows that morning before leaving. None of it mattered, the voice asserted. It would always know. Elias stood frozen, remote clutched uselessly in his hand, thumb mashing the power button. The television remained on. He lunged towards the wall socket, yanking the plug free. The static persisted, the voice undeterred. He dropped the remote, stumbling back. The laughter echoed, amplified by the speakers. His heart pounded violently. His breath grew heavy, ragged. Reaching behind the set, he wrenched the power cord completely from the back panel, nearly losing his balance. Still, the static hissed. The voice laughed. Elias clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut, but the sound permeated everything. He sank to the floor, gasping, waiting for it to end. After an eternity, the laughter finally subsided. The static fizzled out. He cautiously opened his eyes. The screen was black. Silence descended once more. He remained there, huddled on the floor, too terrified to move, knowing with chilling certainty that tomorrow night it would come again. This place, this apartment, it was meant to be an anchor hold against the clamor, a quiet eddy where the day's static could finally dissipate. I'd unearthed its listing online, a terse description promising little more than 4 walls and a door. A quick visit, a signature scribbled on the lease that same afternoon. Exhaustion had eroded my patience for protracted searches or the cacophony of shared living. This unit, I convinced myself, would be sanctuary. It presented a facade of innocuous cleanliness, its air holding only the faintest, neutral scent. The building itself exhaled anonymity, hallways unmarred by garish paint or eccentricities. Utterly, blessedly ordinary, precisely the blank slate I craved. That placid surface, however, proved disturbingly thin. Move-in day dawned on a Saturday. My worldly possessions amounted to a skeletal collection. Sofa, modest bed frame, a solitary table flanked by 2 chairs. utensils rattled in a box alongside plates, clothes resided in compressed bundles. I eschewed movers, preferring the solitary exertion, hauling each piece up the narrow flights myself. The apartment unfolded predictably, a constricted living space bleeding into a functional galley kitchen, a sleeping alcove barely deserving the title bedroom, and a compact washroom. The living room surveyed the street below. The kitchen stared blankly at adjacent brickwork, a standard configuration rendered in sterile white, punctuated by the single naked bulb illuminating the passage between rooms. Aesthetics were irrelevant. Undisturbed sleep was the sole objective. Daylight hours passed uneventfully. I methodically unpacked, tested the electrical sockets, confirmed the refrigerator's low hum, coaxed hot water from the showerhead. All systems nominal. Faint tremors of occupancy registered from above, footfalls muffled by ceiling, and indistinct murmurs drifted from below, yet nothing intrusive enough to fracture the desired calm. A tentative satisfaction settled in. After an early, simple meal, I sank onto the sofa, scrolling through the digital ether on my phone, absorbing fleeting video clips, feeling the knots in my shoulders begin to loosen. Peace felt attainable. Hours drifted, drowsiness eventually claiming me. Around midnight, anticipating nothing more than oblivion, I retired. That first night passed without incident, leaving only the unfamiliar stiffness of a new mattress as evidence of change. Sunday unfurled under a mild sun. I ambled through the surrounding streets, mapping the territory. A small corner market, a modest diner, a laundromat clinging to the next block. The neighborhood slumbered, cars lining the curbs, a few residents walking dogs with quiet purpose. The air felt gentle, the light benevolent. This, I mused, was the rhythm I sought, a tranquil pocket where existence could proceed, unremarked. Returning in the afternoon, I cobbled together another simple meal before positioning the television directly on the living room floor, lacking a proper stand. Power cord connected, screen flickering to life, I drifted through news segments and the vacant spectacle of reality programming. As evening deepened, the impending weight of the work week asserted itself. I killed the TV's glow, performed my ablutions, and sought sleep once more. It was during this second night's routine that the anomaly first surfaced, standing before the bathroom mirror, engaged in my habitual sotto voce monologue. Reminders whispered into the reflection, lunch, alarm at 6. I registered a faint reverberation. Barely audible, I initially dismissed it as imagination. Yet it wasn't a typical echo. A distinct lag separated my utterance from its phantom repetition, the sound strangely muted, almost filtered. I paused, listening intently into the silence. Nothing. Shrugging it off as acoustic oddity, aging pipes perhaps, or sound waves bouncing strangely down the hall, I extinguished the light and retreated to bed. Monday morning broke early. The workday unfolded with its customary grinding monotony. I returned near 7 that evening, feet aching, shoulders tight with residual tension. The agenda was minimal: quick sustenance, a shower, then collapse. I nuked a pre-packaged meal, consumed it standing in the kitchen, deposited the plastic husk in the bin. Then, the shower. Hot water hissed, steam blooming, the pipes groaning their ancient protest. As I rinsed, murmuring aloud the next day's obligations, I heard it again, the echo, so faint it demanded focused attention. Initially, it mimicked a fragment of my phrase, but drawn out, slower. Then a shift occurred. Instead of mirroring my words, it offered something else. A whisper, indistinct, yet unsettlingly familiar. It sounded like my own voice, pitched lower, imbued with a peculiar hesitation. I cut the water flow, standing stock still, droplets tracing paths down my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs. Silence descended, broken only by the rhythmic drip from the faucet. I waited. Nothing followed. Fatigue, I reasoned, plumbing resonance. I toweled off, dressed, and actively tried to banish the incident from my thoughts. Later, lying in the darkness, eyes fixed on the unseen ceiling, unease coiled within me. The apartment was a vacuum of sound. Outside, the street slept. A lone street lamp cast weak oblongs of light through the window, sketching faint silhouettes of my meager furniture. I squeezed my eyes shut, courting sleep, but a disquieting awareness persisted. Then, a soft, distant susurrus, like my own voice, calling my name. I bolted upright, fumbling for the bedside lamp, flooding the small space with weak light, listening. Only the frantic thrumming in my own ears answered. A hypnagogic flicker, I decided. A trick of the tired mind. I forced myself back down. Tuesday morning arrived with a dull headache. Painkillers and coffee preceded my departure for another long day, overshadowed by a new layer of anxiety. Every phone call, every conversation on the colleague snagged on the memory of that aberrant echo. Its inexplicability gnawed at me. Returning home at the usual hour, I deposited my belongings, assembled a rudimentary sandwich, and attempted distraction via television. Restlessness prickled. I began to pace the confines of the apartment. In the bathroom, lights off, I spoke into the dimness. "Hello," expecting perhaps that delayed whisper. Silence answered. I moved to the hallway, tried again. A normal, brief echo responded, the kind expected in a narrow corridor. I held my breath, still no uncanny repetition. A flicker of relief instantly extinguished. Behind me, a low mumble, barely cresting the threshold of hearing. I spun around, empty hallway, yet the air felt suddenly colder, raising gooseflesh on my arms, prickling the nape of my neck. I switched off the hall light, retreating to the living room, chastising myself for succumbing to self-generated phantoms. Nightfall amplified the tension. Relaxation proved elusive. I cracked the living room window, admitting a sliver of cool night air. The occasional car passed, its headlights briefly sweeping the ceiling, but otherwise, stillness reigned. Closing the window, I slumped onto the sofa, seeking refuge in the mindless tapping of phone games. Perhaps half an hour crawled by before a flicker in my peripheral vision, a shadow detaching itself near the kitchen doorway. I surged to my feet, heart leaping, flicking on the kitchen light as I burst through the opening. Nothing, just the stark glare on linoleum. Adrenaline surged, a metallic taste in my mouth. Imagination, surely. A reflection from somewhere? No plausible source presented itself. Bedtime beckoned, though sleep felt improbable. Before retreating, I voiced my frustration aloud. "I'm done with this!" The echo answered instantly. "Done with this!" My own words, yes, but stretched, distorted, laced with a mocking cadence. I froze, throat constricting, fingertips tingling. I backed away from the nearest wall, staring at its blank white expanse. Drywall, paint, nothing more. Hesitantly, I pressed my ear against the surface. A faint vibration met my skin. a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a deeply submerged heartbeat. I recoiled, phone nearly slipping from my grasp. Abandoning the living room, I fled to the bedroom, shutting the door firmly behind me. The lock clicked, a futile gesture. Tremors ran through me. Blankets pulled high, I lay listening. Silence stretched, then fractured. Close by, near the wall behind the headboard, a soft thump, thump, a muted, insistent rhythm. My chest tightened, breath grew shallow. I scrambled to the far side of the mattress, seeking distance. Was the pulse real? My imagination running wild. Placing a hand flat against the cool plaster revealed nothing. Yet pressing my ear close once more confirmed it. The gentle, rhythmic thumping persisted, deep within the structure. I pushed away, sitting bolt upright. Sleep remained hours away, arriving only through sheer, draining exhaustion. The following morning, the lure of calling in sick was potent, yet financial necessity and the precariousness of a new job propelled me out the door. My thoughts remained stubbornly tethered to the apartment, replaying the echo's unsettling mimicry. Acoustic anomaly? Hidden listening device? During my lunch break, the impulse to search online arose, but embarrassment held me back. What search term could possibly capture this? Apartment mimics voice incorrectly. The absurdity was palpable. After work, a stop at the corner store for essentials felt like delaying the inevitable. Returning felt like crossing a hostile border. The moment I stepped inside, the sensation of being observed descended. The living room ceiling fixture flickered once, then held steady. Stale air clung heavy. I moved directly to the kitchen, unpacking groceries with mechanical motions. Turning back to face the living room, I attempted composure. Everything appeared normal. Dust motes danced in the light. The sofa sat inert. The television screen remained dark, objectively unchanged, yet my pulse raced. I decided on a systematic check. Moving through the apartment, I pressed my ear to each wall. Living room, inert. Kitchen, silent. The hallway, however, pausing midway, I detected it again. A subtle vibration, a low hum, placing my palms flat against the plaster. The sensation intensified, pulsing faintly beneath my touch. I snatched my hands back. "Hello?" I ventured, voice tight. A beat of silence, then, from the far end of the corridor, my voice returned, attenuated, elongated, roughened with a forced rasp. "Hello!" My heart hammered. I retreated quickly to the living room. Minutes later, I dialed the landlord's number. Voicemail. I left a message, attempting nonchalance, inquiring vaguely about the building's construction, the tremor in my voice betraying my anxiety. No mention of echoes. Appearing unhinged felt like a greater risk. "Call me back when you can," I concluded, hanging up. Seated at the kitchen table, I stared at the inert phone. The urge to call someone, anyone, was strong, but I had no close confidants in this city. Work colleagues were mere acquaintances, unsuitable recipients for such a bizarre tale. Isolation pressed in. That night I attempted sleep on the sofa, the television murmuring on low volume, its flickering screen providing a meager defense against the dark. I drifted into a shallow doze, only to be jolted awake by a voice emanating from the TV speakers. Not the program I'd left on, but a wash of static, and woven within it, my own voice, insistently repeating my name. "Elias, Elias." I scrambled for the remote, silencing the set. The static died. The room plunged back into silence, save for my own ragged breathing. Chest constricted, I switched on the lamp, its sudden glare momentarily blinding. My eyes scanned the room, half expecting a lurking presence. Nothing, just the familiar confines, now charged with menace. I sat, rubbing my temples, striving for calm. A few minutes later, the echo drifted from the hallway, softly spoken, as if seeking attention, the words indistinct, just the quiet timbre of my own voice, laced with a tremor. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to respond. Then, resolve hardened. I would confront it. Slowly, I moved into the hallway. The overhead light flickered again, casting dancing shadows. I stood in the center of the passage, bathroom door to one side, bedroom to the other. "Who's there?" My voice, louder than intended, bounced off the narrow walls. I waited, tense. The reply came after its characteristic delay, not mirroring my question, but twisting it. "Who's there?" The sound had a wet, gurgling quality. Nausea rose in my throat. Sweat beaded on my forehead. "Stop," I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. The echo returned, blunt, lower-pitched. "Stop." My palms were slick, my mouth arid. Stepping forward, I reached out, touching the wall again. The slow pulse throbbed beneath my fingertips, faint but undeniable, like the slow beat of a hidden heart. I snatched my hand back as if burned. Turning, I rushed into the bedroom, slammed the door, and threw the lock. A symbolic act, I knew, offering no real barrier, yet providing a sliver of perceived security. I sank onto the bed, breath coming in harsh gasps. The room was dark, the silence profound, oppressive. I fumbled for the bedside lamp again. Soft yellow light illuminated tangled sheets, a pile of discarded clothes. I waited. For a time, the walls remained quiescent. Then, behind the headboard, the gentle thumping resumed. I pressed my palms hard against my ears, trying to block the sound, the sensation. My stomach clenched. Trembling became uncontrollable. My breathing grew rapid, shallow. Eventually, driven by a desperate need for action, I retrieved a flashlight from the closet. I approached the wall again, playing the beam across its surface, searching for any imperfection. A crack, a hidden grill, anything. The paint was smooth, unbroken. I tapped the wall, gently. It sounded hollow, ordinary. Crouching, I pressed my ear near the baseboard. The pulse was there, faint but steady, emanating from deep within the structure. Standing abruptly, dizziness washed over me. My head pounded. I switched off the flashlight, collapsing back onto the bed. I remained awake until the first hints of dawn filtered through the curtains, drifting in and out of anxious, shallow sleep, punctuated by faint murmurs that seemed to emanate from the very substance of the walls. The apartment felt sentient, a notion I desperately tried to suppress, focusing instead on maintaining a fragile grip on calm. When morning finally broke, I dressed for work, feeling utterly depleted, eyes gritty, limbs heavy with fatigue. Walking through the living room, I noted the disarray of blankets on the sofa. The air felt thick, stagnant. Grabbing my keys, I exited the apartment, locking the door with deliberate finality. In the stairwell, a wave of profound relief washed over me, simply being outside the confines of that unit. At work, my phone remained stubbornly silent. No call from the landlord. As the day waned, the prospect of returning filled me with visceral dread. I lingered at the office, shuffling papers, engaging in pointless small talk, manufacturing delays, but eventually excuses ran out. The drive home was slow, my stomach churning. Outside the building, I hesitated, gazing up at the windows. My apartment remained dark, offering no clue to the presence within. A deep breath, then entry. The familiar hallway hummed under buzzing fluorescent lights. Unlocking my door, I stepped inside. The stale air enveloped me like a shroud. I dropped my bag by the sofa, scanning the living room. Nothing overtly amiss. I flicked the overhead light switch. It illuminated without protest. A slow exhale. For a moment, the walls were silent. I took a few cautious steps toward the bedroom corridor. That's when it spoke, unprompted. "I'm here." I froze, my hand clenching reflexively around my phone, heart slamming against my ribs. The voice originated from somewhere near the hallway entrance, yet nothing was visible. I swallowed, struggling for composure. How to respond? My mouth was dessert dry, throat tight. I retreated instinctively toward the kitchen, needing water, needing distance. Turning the faucet elicited the usual groan from the pipes. Water trickled out. I splashed some on my face, a grounding ritual. Then, the voice again, seemingly from the living room now. "Face me." The words fractured, as if spoken through trembling lips. I gripped the sink's edge, watching the water flow, pulse thundering in my ears. I shut off the tap, grabbed a glass, filled it. My hand shook, spilling droplets onto the floor. I took a tentative sip, set the glass down, and tried desperately to formulate a plan. Creeping back into the living room, the overhead light buzzed almost imperceptibly. In a shaky voice, I asked, "Why are you here?" My words echoed briefly in the confined space. Then the reply issued from the far corner, a low whisper, my own voice twisted into something alien. "Here. Why?" My stomach lurched. A tremor ran through my entire body. The urge to flee warred with a paralyzing inertia. Slowly, drawn against my better judgment, I approached the corner, just two blank walls meeting at a right angle. Reaching out, my fingertips brushed the cold paint. A tingling sensation followed, then the soft pulse thrumming just behind the surface. My breath hitched. I pulled back sharply, retreating to the center of the room, fighting to control my runaway heartbeat. Sweat trickled down my temples, my shirt clinging damply to my back. Enough. I would pack an overnight bag, find a cheap motel. This was untenable. Retrieving a small duffel from the closet, I began stuffing clothes inside, haphazardly. As I zipped the bag shut, the echo whispered my name again, drawing out the syllables, tasting them. "Elias." Jaw clenched, I ignored it. Slinging the bag over my shoulder, I marched to the front door, hand closing over the knob. "Don't go," the voice pleaded, unmistakably mine, yet quivering with an unnatural fragility. I wrenched the door open without looking back, stepped into the hallway, and locked the apartment securely behind me. Down the stairs I hurried, hands trembling uncontrollably, heart pounding with painful intensity. Reaching my car felt like reaching sanctuary. I drove away, leaving the apartment lights burning, indifferent to the waste. Escape was the only imperative. That night, huddled in a sterile motel room, relief mingled uneasily with residual dread. My body remained taut, sleep shallow and intermittent. I kept listening, half expecting the echo to follow, but the motel walls remained blessedly inert, transmitting only the mundane sounds of neighboring guests. A fragile calm settled, the immediate terror receding, yet the knowledge of the apartment, waiting, lingered. I had escaped for now. But the voice, my voice, warped and questioning, still resonated deep within my skull. Silence was the sanctuary I sought. Now silence is merely the pause between the sounds. From the heart of my living room, I hear it. A faint yet insistent barking drifting through the night air. Impossibly close, yet traceless. A knot tightens beneath my ribs. Sleep, once a welcome refuge, became a fraught territory about a week ago, when this disembodied canine cry first fractured the deep stillness of a moonless night. It hasn't truly ceased since, a waxing and waning reminder that my chosen solitude might be shared. This small house stands adrift, far from the comforting lights of neighbors, a 20-minute drive separating me from the nearest town. Isolation was the architect of this choice, a deliberate retreat for focus, for quiet contemplation, and for months it delivered. Birdsong threaded the mornings, deer materialized like fleeting thoughts near the wood's edge. The vast yard breathed openness. The nights possessed a profound quietude, sometimes achingly so, a stillness I once courted, now a precursor to dread each time the sun bleeds away. It began near 2 a.m. I hovered in that liminal space between waking and sleep when a muffled bark pierced the quiet. Sharp, solitary, a coyote perhaps, or a stray dog momentarily lost. It would pass, I reasoned. Rising, I peered through the window into a yard swallowed by shadow, the moon veiled. Nothing stirred. I retreated to bed, seeking to bury the sound beneath the blankets. The following day revealed no trace. The grass lay unbent, the dirt path unmarked by paws. A fleeting anomaly, I told myself. But the night renewed its claim. Louder this time, more persistent. The barking possessed a ragged edge, the echo distorting it into something distressed, unnatural. Drawn again to the living room window, I parted the blinds. The floodlight cast an empty stage. Nothing. Only the familiar contours of the yard. Decision hardening within me, I flipped the porch switch, pulled on boots, and stepped into the chill. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping the perimeter. No animal, no movement. But there, on the wooden porch, glistening under the light, wet impressions. Not paw prints nor boot marks, irregular patches of moisture, as if something weeping had stood there, leaving behind abstract shapes that led directly to my front door and simply stopped, no trail leading away. Abruptly, the barking ceased. A cold fist clenched in my stomach. I retreated inside, the deadbolt sliding home with a definitive click. Leaning against the door, I fought for breath, heart hammering against my ribs. A neighbor's farm dog, surely, but unseen, vanished, sleep offered no escape. Faint barks punctuated the darkness, seeming to circle the house, now near the back, now by the side windows, then returning to the porch. By dawn, exhaustion had laid claim to me. In the ensuing days, the barking became an erratic tormentor, sometimes staining the deep night, other times arriving with the dusk, or even preceding the dawn. My own home transformed into uncertain ground. A bark would send me scrambling to a window. Emptiness greeted me. A venture outside with the flashlight yielded only undisturbed night. But the damp impressions multiplied. On the porch, the back steps, the path winding around the house, always beginning inexplicably, always ending abruptly. One night, the haunting escalated. The moon, briefly ascendant, succumbed to a tide of clouds, plunging the world into absolute black. The barking resonated in this profound darkness, amplified, echoing with unnerving clarity. Flashlight clutched like a talisman, I stepped out again, meticulously scanning the yard. The sound played tricks, ceasing wherever the beam landed, only to erupt from a different quadrant. A malevolent game. Sweat beaded on my brow, despite the cool air. Circling the house, I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice, thin and strained, sought a human source for the disturbance. Silence answered, broken only by renewed barking from a fresh angle. A tremor began in my arms, my flashlight beam quivering. Then, something brushed my ankle. A fleeting contact, light as a phantom limb or a small creature darting past. I whipped the light downwards. Nothing. Nausea surged. I spun, bathing the immediate area in light. Vacant. "What the hell?" The words escaped, ragged and uncertain. The barking died instantly. I fled back inside, locking the door, leaning against it in the hallway, breath tearing through my lungs, skin clammy. Confusion warred with rising panic. Pacing the living room, I flicked on every light, banishing shadows, leaving the porch illuminated. Finally, I sank onto the sofa, eyes fixed on the door, waiting. The barking did not return. Only when the first grey light of dawn filtered through the windows did I realize I hadn't closed my eyes all night. The following evening, I armed myself. A camera mounted on the front porch, aimed outward. Another watching the back. Evidence, proof. That was the goal. Calling animal control felt premature, ludicrous even. How to describe those amorphous wet patches? Clouds once again swallowed the moon. I sat in the darkened living room, monitor glowing faintly, linked to the cameras. Around midnight, the barking began, a distant tremor. I increased the monitor's volume. Static hissed, leaves rustled on the audio feed, but the visual remained stubbornly empty. Yet, through the very walls of the house, I heard it, undeniably real. My leg jittered, a frantic rhythm against the floor. My hands gripped the chair arms. Closer now. The barking sounded as if it were right on the porch. The monitor showed only illuminated, empty boards. Then, a scrape at the door. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs. Still, the monitor showed nothing. Slowly, silently, I rose and crept towards the entrance. The scraping softened, becoming a persistent, delicate scratching. My hand hovered over the knob. Hesitation warred with the desperate need to know. Turning the cold metal, I pulled the door open a mere inch. A blast of frigid air struck my face. Peering out, I saw them. The wet impressions, glistening darkly under the porch light, leading right to the threshold. A small puddle marked their termination point. My gaze swept the empty yard. No creature, no person. The barking had ceased. A chill, profound and invasive, crept up my spine. My eyes stung, not with tears, but sheer, unbearable tension. I realized I was holding my breath, releasing it in a ragged sigh as I slammed the door shut and threw the lock. Sleep became a fragmented, haunted thing. Each day chipped away at my certainty, my sanity. Subtle details began to warp. Nights felt elongated, the dawn impossibly delayed. The barking seemed to draw strength from the darkness, intensifying when the moon hid its face. In daylight hours, I'd stand in the yard, staring at the spots where the dampness appeared, seeking a source, a rational explanation. The earth remained undisturbed. No residual moisture lingered. It was as if the marks condensed from the air itself. A few nights later, taking out the trash around 8, darkness already absolute. Walking back from the bins, I felt it again, that swift, unsettling brush against my leg. My body went rigid, the flashlight nearly slipping from my grasp. Eyes darting, scanning the immediate dark. Nothing. Then the barking erupted, mere feet away, loud, sharp. The flashlight beam stabbed the night, illuminating only grass, the siding of the house. Vacancy. My own pulse thundered in my ears, a frantic drumbeat urging flight. But where? The barking circled me, close, then distant, then close again, a predatory dance in the unseen. "No! No! No!" I whispered, turning and sprinting for the house, fumbling with the keys, finally tumbling inside and slamming the door. My hands trembled for long minutes afterward. The cameras remained useless witnesses. Hours of reviewed footage yielded nothing definitive. Perhaps a flicker at the edge of the frame, a shadow moving against the grain of the night, but never the source, never the creature. The barking registered only as faint, ambient noise, a ghost in the machine. One night, determined, I sat in the back room, lights off, phone set on the window ledge, recording audio. Around 1 a.m. it began anew, steady this time, relentless, lasting 5 solid minutes. Twigs snapped in the yard, the wind sighed through the trees. Louder it grew, seemingly right outside the glass. My pulse surged, sweat traced a path down my temple. Then, a growl, deep, guttural, resonant. The hairs on my neck prickled erect. I leapt up but remained frozen, muscles coiled, listening intently in the dark. A scrape against the exterior wall, then silence. The audio playback the next morning was chillingly clear. The barking, the growl, stark and terrifying, and utterly unexplained. A profound dread took root, deepening with each passing night. Sleep was a gamble, always lost. The barking, sometimes brief and startling, sometimes a protracted agony twisted my insides. I started whispering into the darkness. "Go away," a futile plea. I left food scraps out. They remained untouched. I sprinkled flour on the porch, hoping for clearer prints. Only the baffling wet patches materialized, leading to my door, ending in nothing. Late one afternoon, mending a loose board on the back porch, the air grew heavy. Distant thunder rumbled, promising a storm. The sky bruised, the wind picking up its pace. Hurrying, I hammered the final nail. As I straightened, a sudden, inexplicable coldness enveloped me from behind. I spun, expecting a wind gust, but saw instead a single fresh, wet footprint directly before the back door. My breath hitched. The sky groaned again. No dog, no person, nothing. Just that solitary, glistening mark. Mind racing, I snatched my tools and retreated inside, locking the door, the repair unfinished. That night, the storm broke, and the barking returned with a terrifying new intensity. Frantic, urgent, almost lost within the percussive roar of rain on the roof and the crackle of thunder, yet somehow distinct, piercing through the chaos. I paced the living room, drawn repeatedly to the window. Lightning flashes offered strobe-lit glimpses of the yard. Empty, rain-lashed. Then another scrape at the front door. My heart leapt. Creeping close, I pressed my ear to the wood. A low whimper, instantly followed by a sharp bark. The doorknob vibrated under my touch, as if something pressed against the other side. A brilliant flash illuminated the porch. A shadow flickered past the window's edge. Gone. I recoiled from the door, hands trembling, legs unsteady. Thunder shook the house's foundations. The knob rattled once more, then stilled. I waited in the ensuing silence, straining to hear over the storm. The barking moved, muffled, to the side of the house, before finally fading into the tempest's roar. Hours later, the storm passed, leaving behind a dripping world. Stepping onto the sodden porch, I found them scattered everywhere. More wet footprints, chaotic, leading nowhere. I followed a few down the steps. They vanished into the saturated grass mere feet away. Standing there, clothes clinging with dampness, I scanned the yard, the only sound my own ragged breathing. My arms felt strangely numb. Something was out here, unseen. And so it continues, night after night. Sometimes a single bark yanks me from uneasy sleep. Sometimes the chorus stretches for hours, tightening the knot in my stomach. Now, as I sit here, the sound persists outside. The moon is lost to thick clouds. I brace myself. My throat is parched, my muscles locked with tension. My gaze flicks constantly towards the windows, anticipating movement in the periphery. What does it want? Where does it vanish? Every foray onto the porch reveals those inexplicable signatures. Every attempt to follow leads to nothing. Some nights, the phantom touch returns, brushing my legs in the dark, leaving only terror in its wake. Leaving feels impossible. This is my home, my only anchor. But how to stop it? How to fight what might not even be an animal? It feels closer now, bolder. The barking louder, the footprints more defined, the darkness somehow deeper, longer. Sleep is a distant memory. I pace, I wait. Tonight it comes in sharp bursts, behind the house, then suddenly at the front door. My skin crawls, my heart refuses to slow. Dawn feels like a myth. The barking continues, and the empty yard offers no answers. Only those wet impressions materializing from the night itself. Something is out there. It demands attention. Its purpose remains shrouded, but its presence is undeniable, growing heavier with each passing hour. I don't know what happens when it finally reveals itself. I only know I can no longer pretend it isn't real. Right now, the barking starts again, closer, and the familiar surge of fear constricts my chest. My hands shake uncontrollably. It's in the yard, watching, scratching, and I am here, alone, listening, terrified to open the door again. A flicker in the rear view, twin glints catching the dashboard's faint glow, and recognition slammed into me. Cold and absolute. A dreadful miscalculation. But the vehicle was already a projectile on the asphalt ribbon, the unknown man beside me, propelling us both into the deepest hollow of the night. Perhaps the final night of my existence. The day had begun shrouded in the mundane. Another return leg from a sterile business engagement. 6 hours of familiar highway dissolving under the tires. Rain, however, had waged war since the city limits vanished behind me. A percussive assault drumming the roof, smearing the windshield into abstract watercolors. Fatigue gnawed, a deep-seated ache behind the eyes blurring the edges of thought. 50 miles declared the sign to the next outpost of civilization, just as my headlights snagged him. A solitary silhouette against the deluge, thumb jutting defiantly, sodden and stark. A fleeting impression, battered canvas pack, a face etched with a weariness mirroring my own. Hitchhikers were specters of cautionary tales, figures I'd always bypassed. Prudence screamed against it, Yet the sheer misery radiating from that roadside tableau, perhaps amplified by my own frayed state, eroded caution. Was it exhaustion dismantling good sense? Or some vague, unexamined impulse toward cosmic balance? Regardless, the brake pedal met the floor. He splashed toward the passenger door as I stretched across the console, releasing the latch. Destination? I projected my voice above the rain's ceaseless thrum. Just a ways ahead, he offered, folding himself into the seat, water pooling instantly on the floor mat. Grateful for the lift, friend. Vicious night. As he composed himself, I registered the details. Younger than perceived through the rain-streaked glass, maybe cresting 30. Garments clung like a second skin, dark hair slicked flat, but his eyes, chips of pale, unnerving ice, fiercely observant, held a jarring vibrancy against his drowned rat condition. Elias, I offered, easing the car back onto the slick tarmac. There's a town, 50 miles or so. Get you that far? He inclined his head, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. That'll serve nicely, Elias. Silas. An interval of quiet descended, punctuated solely by the metronomic sweep of the wipers and the engine's drone. Peripheral awareness tracked Silas. He remained unnervingly motionless, gaze fixed on the unfolding darkness ahead, that faint smile unwavering. The quiet thickened, pressing in. So, I ventured, needing to fracture the tension. This weather, rough night to be stranded. Silas pivoted his head towards me. A current, distinctly cold, traced its way down my spine. His eyes held a new quality now, a flat glacial assessment that prompted an involuntary tightening of my hands on the wheel. Ah, he murmured, voice low, resonant. Just pursuing my necessary trajectory. I managed a non-committal nod, adrift for a suitable reply. The ensuing silence felt weighted, suffocating. My fingers stretched towards the radio console, seeking refuge in manufactured sound. Quicker than thought, Silas's hand clamped onto my wrist. His grip possessed a startling, steely strength. "Best not, Elias," he breathed, the quiet intensity more alarming than a shout. "You and I, we have matters to discuss." A frantic pulse hammered against my ribs. I strained against his hold. It yielded nothing, only intensified. "What is this?" My voice frayed. "Release me." "Maintain our course," Silas commanded, his tone absolute, "and attend closely." Obedience felt like the only option, my thoughts a chaotic vortex. How had this detour from normalcy occurred? What was his endgame? "You're likely contemplating my motives," Silas stated, mirroring my frantic internal questions. "Understand this, Elias. You weren't the first Samaritan to offer passage tonight. You may, however, prove to be the final one." A clammy chill bloomed across my skin. "Meaning what?" I forced the words out, dreading the answer. His grip eased fractionally, yet the implied threat held me immobile. "I've traversed this particular stretch for an age, Elias, longer perhaps than your mind can readily grasp, and I've observed your type, the benevolent souls, the roadside rescuers. You share a common core." He inclined closer, his proximity unnerving, breath near my ear. "You perceive it as altruism, don't you? A noble act. Yet fundamentally, it nourishes your own self-regard. a convenient way to affirm your perceived virtue. Protest formed, then died, strangled by rising terror. But, Silas mused, would that virtue withstand the unvarnished truth? Would your compassion persist if you understood my dealings with those previous benefactors? Ice seemed to crystallize in my veins. Others, the implication was monstrous. "Execute a turn, right here," Silas directed, indicating a barely discernible track veering off into the woods. My foot wavered above the brake. A fleeting window. Slam the brakes. Fight. Flee. As if intercepting the thought, a cold, unyielding pressure materialized against my side. Metal. Hard-edged. "Unwise, Elias," he cautioned softly. "This instrument has performed its function already tonight. Let's not necessitate an encore." Any flickering ember of resistance extinguished. Trembling, I wrenched the wheel, plunging the car onto the rutted path. Overhanging limbs clawed at the vehicle's flanks as we tunneled deeper into impenetrable gloom, the headlamps carving feeble arcs into the void. "An observation, Elias," Silas remarked, his tone bizarrely casual, like discussing weather patterns. "Most individuals, upon grasping the peril, resort to supplication, bargaining, weeping, offering worldly goods. You, however, exhibit a certain composure." I swallowed against a constricted throat. "What is your objective?" Silas emitted a dry rasp, devoid of mirth. "My objective? An excellent query, Elias. Profound, even." We bumped and jolted along the deteriorating track for what felt like an eternity compressed into minutes. Then, the trees relented, revealing a small, sodden clearing. "Halt the vehicle," Silas instructed. "Extinguish the engine, but maintain the headlamps." My fingers fumbled with the ignition, the ensuing silence amplifying the rain's relentless drumming on the roof. "Egress, slowly," he commanded. I pushed the door open, stepping into the cold embrace of the downpour, instantly drenched. Silas emerged behind me, the weapon unwavering. "Proceed to the vehicle's front." As I complied, the beam sliced through the rain, illuminating a sight that sent nausea churning through me. An excavation in the mire, starkly rectangular, unmistakably purpose-dug. A grave. "The pieces likely assemble themselves now," Silas stated, positioning himself beside me. "Your passage concludes here, Elias." My gaze locked onto the gaping earth, my consciousness refusing to integrate the reality. Surely this was a fever dream, a nightmare from which I'd soon violently awake. Yet the chilling rain, the viscous mud sucking at my shoes, the unyielding pressure of the gun barrel, all screamed authenticity. "Why?" The word tore from my throat, raw and thin. "What purpose does this serve?" Silas paused, a strange quietude falling over him. When he spoke, his tone held a melancholic resonance. "Because illumination is required, Elias. Someone must demonstrate that benevolence is merely gilded self-interest, that every seemingly selfless act carries an inevitable, often terrible, cost." A nudge propelled me closer to the precipice, my legs threatening to buckle. "A final statement?" Silas inquired. I squeezed my eyes shut, a torrent of faces, regrets, and forfeited futures flooding my mind. Grief warred with a sudden hot surge of indignation. This injustice, this arbitrary end, I hadn't earned it. My eyes snapped open. I turned, facing him squarely. "Yes," I declared, astonished at the steadiness in my voice. "I have something to say." Silas arched a brow, a flicker of morbid curiosity in his expression. "Proceed." I drew a ragged breath. "My stopping for you wasn't transactional, not for cosmic reward nor self-congratulation. It was simple. You appeared to need aid, and I possessed the means to offer it. If that brands me naive in your worldview, then so be it. But it doesn't negate kindness. It underscores its desperate necessity in a world that breeds cynicism like yours." Silas simply observed me for a protracted moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, the gun's muzzle dipped. "You genuinely hold to that?" he asked, a note of incredulity coloring his voice. I affirmed with a silent nod, words failing me. His gaze shifted from the waiting earth back to my face. For the briefest instant, a fissure of doubt seemed to cross his features. "Perhaps," he began, but then dismissed it with a shake of his head. "No, irrevocable now." The weapon ascended once more. I shut my eyes, bracing for the impact. Instead of a shot, a dull thud echoed, followed by the splash of something heavy hitting mud. My eyes flew open. Silas lay sprawled on the ground, his weapon nearby. A uniformed figure stood over him, stun gun still extended. The clearing erupted in flashing blue and red as more cruisers materialized from the darkness. As officers subdued Silas, binding his wrists, one approached me. "Sir, are you unharmed?" Still reeling, I managed another nod. How did you locate us?" The officer offered a faint smile. "Another motorist you assisted earlier tonight flagged a concerning encounter with a hitchhiker matching his description. We'd been trailing his approximate route." As the flood of adrenaline subsided, the crushing gravity of the near-fatal encounter descended. My knees gave way, relief and terror warring within me. In the subsequent days, navigating police reports and the disorienting echo of the event, a single conviction solidified. Despite the horror, the impulse to help had been right. For if compassion falters, if we barricade ourselves against the vulnerability of strangers, then the philosophy of men like Silas prevails. And that surrender was a future too bleak to contemplate. The silence was the first violation. Not quiet, not stillness, but an absolute void where sound should have been. No birdsong embroidered the air, no distant engine murmured its mechanical mantra, not even the sigh of wind in the skeletal branches overhead. Just this profound, swallowing hush, a vacuum that seemed to leach the very resonance from the world. I'd stumbled into Hollow Creek, purely by mishap, my GPS a dead screen, miles back on a trail that had betrayed its promises. Now, dragging my throbbing, twisted ankle down the deserted main thoroughfare, I felt an undeniable trespass, the sense of having breached a place meant to remain unseen. Only that morning, aspiration had thrummed within me, the allure of a newly charted path singing its siren song from a web page. Stunning vistas, it had declared, a moderate challenge for the lone trekker. Yet 3 hours deep, the mountain revealed its teeth. The trail became a treacherous scramble. My water vanished like a mirage, and confidence eroded with the path itself. Then, the blunder. One loose stone, a slip, and a dizzying tumble down an unforgiving slope, my ankle screaming in protest as it contorted. When the world stopped spinning, I was bruised, bewildered, and utterly adrift. My phone offered only mocking silence. No bars, no signal. The map app a useless blank. With the sun bleeding towards the western ridge, urgency clawed at me. Help. I needed it, and fast. That's when I saw them. Faint roof lines etching themselves against the bruised twilight sky. A surge of desperate hope propelled me forward, each hobbled step a prayer for sanctuary. But proximity soured that hope, curdling it into a deep disquiet. Hollow Creek felt curated, like a museum exhibit left unattended. Storefronts lining the street were relics from a bygone era, perhaps the 1950s. Their paint faded, yet strangely preserved, untouched by time's usual decay. Automobiles sat askew, abandoned mid-thought, their chrome dulled but intact. And over everything lay that pervasive, unnatural silence. "Hello?" My voice cracked the stillness, sounding obscenely loud, an intrusion. "Is anyone there? I need assistance." Nothing answered, not even the ghost of an echo. The air itself felt thick, absorbent. I limped towards a structure promising sustenance, a diner whose neon open sign cast a weak, flickering pulse in the dying light. A muffled chime from the bell above the door announced my entry into a time capsule. Red vinyl booths gleamed softly. A jukebox stood sentinel in the corner, mute. But the space was utterly devoid of life. "Hello?" I ventured again, the word barely a whisper now, instinctively lowering my voice against the profound quiet. "Please, I'm injured. I just need to make a call." As my vision adjusted to the gloom, a detail snagged my attention. Upon a table, a meal sat half-consumed, the food beginning to congeal. Steam still curled, impossibly, from the coffee mug beside the plate, as if the diner's occupants had simply evaporated mid-bite. A tremor, cold and sharp, traced its way down my spine. Something here was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I retreated from the diner, heart hammering against my ribs. The street outside had shifted, shadows stretching like grasping fingers as the sun sank lower. And then, a flicker, movement. Across the way, in the glass pane of a shop window, a face, pale, gaunt, eyes wide before vanishing behind a drawn curtain. "Wait!" I cried out, lurching towards the shop, desperation overriding fear. "Please, I need help!" My hand reached for the doorknob, but it turned before I touched it. The door swung inward, revealing an elderly woman. Her eyes were deep-set orbits in a face like crumpled parchment, yet her gaze held a startling, unnerving acuity that halted me in my tracks. "You shouldn't have come," she breathed, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "It isn't safe here, not after dusk." Before I could form a question, her grip, surprisingly tenacious, closed on my arm. She pulled me inside with unexpected force, the door slamming shut behind us, sealing us in. The interior was a general store, its shelves laden with dust-coated tins and antiquated sundries. "What is this place?" I stammered, the tremor in my voice betraying my fear. "Where is everyone? My ankle. I just need a phone." "Hush," she commanded, a bony finger pressed urgently to her lips. They have ears for everything. Who? The word was a choked whisper, dread coiling tight in my stomach. The old woman, Agnes, darted to the window, her gaze scanning the empty street. The others, she murmured, the word heavy with unspoken history. Those who collected everyone else. We welcomed them, you see, thought them saviors. A bitter irony laced her tone. They arrived bearing gifts, promises of life without end, bodies impervious to decay. Oh, how readily we drank their lies. I stared, struggling to grasp the fractured narrative. I don't understand. What others? What happened? She turned from the window, her ancient eyes swimming with a sorrow too deep for tears, yet edged with terror. 5 years now, strangers appeared, offering their elixir, a cure for age, for illness, and it worked, for a time. Her voice frayed, a shudder racking her frail form. But then came the change, not just halted aging, but reversal, a sickening devolution. People grew younger, shrinking back through the years, until they simply ceased. Infants one day vanished the next. Those of us who refused their gift, we are the remnants, the hidden, the waiting. Vertigo threatened. Her words sketched a reality too grotesque to contemplate. Impossible, I managed. That doesn't happen. Agnes let out a short, brittle laugh devoid of humor. My dear child, you comprehend so little of the possible. But listen, you must leave. Now, before they sense you. As if summoned by her words, a low, resonant hum began to permeate the air, vibrating through the floorboards. Agnes's eyes widened, stark terror erasing everything else. They're stirring, she whispered frantically. Hide yourself, quickly. She shoved me towards a doorway at the rear of the shop, but instinct made me resist. Wait, I can't leave you. Come with me, we can get out together. She shook her head, a gesture of finality. Too old, too slow. I would doom us both. Go, now, and whatever happens, let them catch no sight of you. Accept nothing they offer. Run. Just run. The humming intensified, accompanied now by a strange, ethereal light pulsing beyond the shop windows, casting dancing blue patterns on the dusty shelves. Against every instinct screaming protest, I obeyed. Hobbling frantically, I pushed through the rear doorway and found a cramped storage closet. I squeezed inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a sliver. Through the crack, I watched the main shop flood with an otherworldly azure luminescence. Voices arose, not human speech, but a discordant chorus of whispers, overlapping, unintelligible, chilling. I held my breath, pressing myself flat against the cool wood of the back wall. The whispers seemed to swirl closer. Shadows writhed just beyond my flimsy concealment. My own heartbeat felt like a drum, loud enough surely to betray me. Then, as abruptly as it began, the phenomenon ceased. The blue light vanished. The humming died. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I remained frozen, scarcely breathing, counting seconds that stretched into an eternity. When the tension became unbearable, I eased the door open, peering out. The shop was empty. No Agnes, no sign of the entities she feared. Cautiously, I emerged, my injured ankle sending jolts of pain with every hesitant step. I crept back to the front of the store. Outside, Hollow Creek lay unchanged, deserted, silent, trapped in its temporal amber. But the veneer had been stripped away. Now I knew the monstrous truth sleeping beneath its placid surface. I didn't linger. Ignoring the fire in my ankle, I ran. I ran blindly, stumbling through the oppressive quiet until the town was a fading memory behind me, until asphalt appeared beneath my feet, until the headlights of a passing truck offered salvation. The driver eyed my disheveled state and wild story with disbelief, yet kindly drove me towards the nearest town, towards help, towards the rational world. I never filed a report. What official account could contain the impossible truth of Hollow Creek? Sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, when the world stills itself, I question my own memory. But then I recall Agnes's haunted eyes, her final warning. I think of the townsfolk who chased eternity and found oblivion instead, and a certainty, cold and absolute, settles in my bones. Some corners of the earth are best left undisturbed, some silences best left unbroken, lest you wander into a place from which there is no return. Some voids aren't merely an absence of light, they are pockets of coagulated time, places the current of the world has eddied around and forgotten, a sepulchral stillness, dense and watchful. Such was the air I breathed the instant I crossed the threshold of Silas's ancestral cabin, nestled deep within woods that felt older than memory. My expectations for the weekend had been modest, solitude, a respite from the city's clamor. Yet, stepping inside, an intuition prickled. This quiet was not the vibrant hush of nature, teeming with unseen life. This was inert. The cabin, a relic passed down through Silas's lineage, stood derelict for years. His invitation for a weekend retreat was readily accepted. The allure of escape proved potent. He and Clara were due the following day, but I'd elected to arrive prematurely, envisioning a tranquil night alone. A hearth fire, a good book, immersion in sylvan peace. The drive itself was a descent, the unpaved track clawing deeper into primordial forest until the world outside ceased to exist. Dusk bled through the canopy as I arrived, painting the clearing in bruised hues. The cabin hunched there, timber bones, a stone spine of a chimney, a porch gazing sightlessly into the arboreal gloom. Rustic, yes. Isolated, undeniably. But the quiet, it wasn't peace, it was a held breath. My boots echoed on the porch planks, a brittle sound in the thick air. The door protested with a wooden groan, yielding to an interior thick with the scent of ossified time and damp decay. A flicked switch coaxed reluctant, anemic light from a ceiling fixture, revealing a Spartan layout. Hearth, kitchenette corner, a shadowed doorway promising a rear bedroom. Dust lay like a shroud. I wrestled windows open, hoping to bleed out the stagnant quietude, but the forest offered only listless sighs. The pervasive sense of being observed tightened its grip. I dismissed it as solitude-induced jitters. A fire, though, that might anchor me. Flames eventually licked the logs to life, casting kinetic shadows, a fragile warmth against the encroaching chill. I forced down a meager meal, cocooned myself on the threadbare sofa with a novel, feigning normalcy. For a spell, the fire's murmur almost convinced me. Then, beneath its crackle, Another sound surfaced, a delicate, insistent percussion. Tap, tap, tap. Faint, yet unnervingly methodical. Not the random brush of branch or the settling groan of old wood. This felt directed, from somewhere beyond the walls. I rose, the book forgotten. The window glass threw back only the fire's jittering reflection. Was it the wind? No, the rhythm held too steady, an insidious beat, as if soliciting entry. Heart quickening, I retrieved my torch, its beam slicing the gloom as I unlatched the door and stepped onto the porch. Instantly, silence slamped back down. The night air hung heavy, motionless. The tapping vanished. My light swept the clearing, probing the dense wall of trees. Empty, just the woods, vast and indifferent, and the cabin's dark bulk at my back. A loose shutter, perhaps. A nocturnal creature? Rationalizations felt thin. Retreating inside, I secured the lock, the unease a cold knot tightening in my gut. Then it resumed, not faint now but sharper, demanding. Tap, tap, tap. From the cabin's rear flank, near the bedroom, my blood went cold. Eyes flickered to the shadowed doorway. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, measured, inexorable. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Torch clutched tight, its beam quivering. I forced myself toward the back. I dreaded opening that bedroom door, dreaded confronting whatever lay beyond the glass. Yet the summons persisted, escalating, impatient. The sound localized, just outside the bedroom window, a thin pane of glass away. Tap, tap, tap. It felt impossibly close, resonating within the very walls. With a tortured screech of hinges, I pushed open the bedroom door. Austere space, bed frame, dresser, a single window, sealed against the night. But the wrapping vibrated, tangible, from just the other side. Hesitantly, I advanced, breath held captive in my throat. The torch beam stabbed through the darkness, painting the window pane. At first, only the moon-washed clearing beyond, vacant. Then, angling the light downward, toward the forest's ragged edge. It, a silhouette detached from the deeper shadows. Tall, unnaturally so. Limbs like skeletal branches, elongated and thin, merging with the night. No features discernible, no face, just an upright void against the lesser dark. A statue carved from solidified dread. I was paralyzed, the torch trembling violently. It simply stood, an obsidian sentinel, its posture conveying an unnerving attentiveness, head canted as if in appraisal. The tapping ceased. Time stretched taut. My own heartbeat roared in my ears, a frantic drum against the profound silence. I willed my limbs to move, to flee, but they were led. Then, with a fluidity that defied its stark form, the shape pivoted and dissolved back into the tree line, swallowed by the darkness without a whisper. How long I remained rooted there, gazing at the empty space where it had stood, I cannot say. Eventually, motor control returned. I staggered back to the main room, collapsing near the hearth, heart a wild bird trapped in my ribs. Sleep was unthinkable. Windows became malevolent eyes I dared not approach. I huddled by the dwindling fire, torch gripped in one hand, inert phone in the other, a vigil kept against the crushing weight of the night, praying for dawn. When Silas and Clara arrived the next morning, their cheerful voices were a jarring dissonance. I offered no explanation for my pallor or the tremor in my hands as I loaded my gear. A fabricated urgency, a need to return. They accepted it easily. Driving away, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror felt like escaping a suffocating grasp. I have never returned. Some enclaves of stillness, I now understand, guard secrets best left undisturbed. There are watchers in the deep woods, and sometimes ignorance is the only sanctuary.